In the millisecond after a bomb detonates, your brain experiences something that shouldn't be possible. It moves inside your skull. Not metaphorically, literally. The shockwave travels through your body faster than your neurons can fire a warning signal. By the time you realize what's happening, the damage is already done. Today, we're going inside the neurobiology of blast trauma, where the invisible becomes catastrophic, and survival is just the beginning of the battle. Here's what most people don't know. Your brain doesn't care whether you're a soldier or a civilian when a bomb goes off. The physics are identical. But there's a dark paradox hidden in the data. Military personnel exposed to repeated blasts, artillery crews, breachers, EOD technicians, often develop a condition neurologists call breacher's brain. It looks like early-onset Alzheimer's, memory loss, emotional dysregulation, protein tangles that shouldn't appear until someone's 70s. But civilian survivors of single mass bombings, their scans show something different, more focused, more surgical in its destruction. The reason? Proximity and repetition. A soldier might experience hundreds of low-grade blasts over a career, each one shaking the brain like a snow globe, causing microscopic tears that accumulate. A civilian at a concert or market experiences one massive, concentrated event. Same mechanism, different trajectories, both devastating. And the truly haunting part? In both cases, the damage often begins in complete silence. No bleeding, no obvious fracture, just a cascade of cellular chaos that won't show symptoms for hours, days, or even weeks. Let's start at the source: detonation. When an explosive device detonates, it doesn't just create fire and shrapnel, it creates an overpressure wave, a wall of compressed air molecules traveling at supersonic speed. In the Manchester Arena bombing of 2017, that wave radiated outward at approximately 1,500 meters per second, faster than the speed of sound, faster than any human reflex. Think of air as normally being like a calm ocean, molecules evenly spaced, gently bouncing off each other. A blast wave is like taking that ocean and compressing it into a solid wall of water traveling at highway speeds. When it hits your body, three things happen simultaneously. First, primary blast injury. The pressure wave enters your body through any air-filled space, your ears, your lungs, your sinuses, but most critically, through your skull. Bone doesn't stop pressure waves, it transmits them. The wave enters through your face, your eye sockets, the thin temporal bone near your temples. It travels through cerebrospinal fluid, the protective cushion around your brain, and suddenly, that cushion becomes a weapon. The fluid can't compress, so it transfers the energy directly into brain tissue. Dr. Ibuya Cernak, one of the world's leading blast injury researchers, studied survivors of the 1999 Belgrade bombing. She found something extraordinary. Many patients had zero external injuries. No burns, no shrapnel wounds, but their brain scans revealed microscopic hemorrhages, tiny bleeds scattered throughout the white matter like a constellation of destruction. One survivor described it perfectly. "I felt like someone had slapped the inside of my head." Imagine your brain as a delicate jellyfish floating in a jar of water. Now imagine someone hitting that jar with a hammer. The jar doesn't break. The water doesn't spill. But the jellyfish inside? Every tentacle, every membrane, every delicate structure ripples with the impact. That's what's happening at the cellular level. But the pressure wave is just the trigger. What happens next is where the real devastation begins. Your neurons are designed to conduct electrical signals, not to survive mechanical stress. When the pressure wave passes through brain tissue, it creates what biomechanics researchers call diffuse axonal injury, or DAI. Axons are the long cables that connect one neuron to another. They're wrapped in a fatty insulation called myelin. Think of it as the rubber coating on an electrical wire. During a blast, these axons stretch, twist. Sometimes they snap completely, but more often, they develop microscopic tears. At first, the neuron tries to repair itself. Transport proteins, the cellular machinery that moves nutrients along the axon, start accumulating at the site of injury. This creates bulges called axonal swellings. If you could see them under a microscope, they'd look like a garden hose with knots tied in it. The signal can't get through. This is exactly what researchers found in the brains of deceased military breachers, specialists who use explosives to breach doors and walls. Dr. Daniel Pearl at the Uniformed Services University examined their brain tissue and found patterns identical to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the disease found in NFL players and boxers. But here's the critical difference. Football players get hit in the head. Breachers often experience blasts from behind protective barriers. The explosion never touches them directly. The pressure wave simply passes through. One former breacher described his symptoms before death. "I'd be mid-sentence and forget what I was saying. I'd walk into a room and have no idea why. My wife said I wasn't the same person anymore." His brain was trying to function with thousands of damaged cables. Your brain normally operates like a fiber optic internet network, billions of signals zipping along clean, intact pathways at incredible speeds. After blast exposure, it's like someone took bolt cutters to random cables throughout the network. Some connections work, some are slow, some just stop. And your consciousness, your you, has to navigate this damaged infrastructure every single moment of every day. But the mechanical damage is only half the story. Because when neurons get injured, they release a chemical signal, a distress beacon. And in the case of blast trauma, that beacon triggers a cascade that can kill healthy brain cells hours after the explosion. The signal is called glutamate. In normal circumstances, it's your brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, the go signal that makes neurons fire. But damaged neurons release glutamate uncontrollably. And nearby healthy neurons, detecting this flood of glutamate, activate and activate and activate. This is called excitotoxicity, literally, excitement that becomes toxic. Neurons fire so rapidly, so continuously, that they exhaust their energy supplies and die. It's like forcing a car engine to redline until it overheats and seizes. Dr. Ramon Diaz-Arrastia, a traumatic brain injury specialist, describes it as a neurochemical storm. One damaged cell can trigger a chain reaction that kills thousands of neighbors. And this storm can continue for 72 hours or more after the initial blast. This is why combat medics and EMTs are trained to look for subtle signs of blast exposure, even in patients with no visible injuries. Confusion or disorientation, nausea and vomiting from inner ear damage, light sensitivity from optic nerve pressure, inability to recall the event. In the Boston Marathon bombing, several survivors were initially sent home from the hospital because they had no shrapnel wounds. They returned days later with severe headaches, memory problems, and personality changes. The glutamate storm had been quietly destroying tissue while they thought they were fine. Think of your brain cells like houses in a neighborhood. The bomb is a hurricane that damages a few houses, but then those damaged houses start leaking gas. The gas spreads to neighboring houses, causing explosions. Those explosions damage more houses, which leak more gas. Within hours, an entire neighborhood is on fire, not from the original hurricane, but from the cascade it triggered. And then there's the third wave, inflammation. Your brain is normally protected by the blood-brain barrier, a selective filter that prevents most substances in your bloodstream from entering brain tissue. But blast trauma disrupts this barrier. Suddenly, immune cells that are normally kept out flood into the brain. These cells, microglia and astrocytes, are trying to help. They're cleaning up debris, trying to repair damage. But in the chaos, they release inflammatory molecules, cytokines, chemokines, free radicals. These molecules can damage healthy neurons, create scar tissue, and disrupt normal brain function. PET scans of bombing survivors show widespread inflammation persisting for months after the event. Areas of the brain that weren't directly injured by the pressure wave become inflamed simply from proximity to damaged tissue. Here's where the neurobiology gets especially cruel. This inflammation particularly affects three regions: the amygdala, your fear center; the hippocampus, your memory consolidation center; the prefrontal cortex, your emotional regulation center. This is the neurobiological foundation of PTSD. It's not just psychological. The very regions of your brain responsible for processing fear, forming memories, and regulating emotions have been physiologically damaged. Dr. Carrie Ressler at McLean Hospital studied the brains of PTSD patients and found that the amygdala, normally about the size of an almond, was hyperactive, constantly firing. The hippocampus had actually shrunk, and the prefrontal cortex showed reduced activity. Imagine your brain's fear system as a car alarm. Normally, it goes off when someone tries to break into your car, then shuts off once the threat is gone. After blast trauma, the wiring is damaged. The alarm goes off randomly. It's hypersensitive to vibrations. Sometimes it won't turn off at all. And the off button, your prefrontal cortex, doesn't work properly anymore. That's not weakness. That's not a character flaw. That's a neurological injury trying to protect you in an environment it no longer correctly perceives. Let's talk about what this actually feels like, because the neuroscience creates experiences that seem impossible to outside observers. One of the most disorienting symptoms reported by bombing survivors is sensory fragmentation, the feeling that your senses aren't synchronized anymore. A survivor of the 2004 Madrid train bombing described it like this: "I would see my wife's lips moving, but the words would arrive 2 seconds late, like watching a badly dubbed movie, but it was reality." Here's what's happening. Different sensory information travels along different neural pathways. Visual information from your eyes travels through the optic nerve to the occipital lobe. Auditory information travels through the auditory nerve to the temporal lobe. These signals normally arrive at your consciousness precisely synchronized, but after blast injury, some pathways are damaged more than others. Axonal injuries slow signal transmission. It's like some cables in your internet network are now running at dial-up speed while others are still fiber optic. The synchronization breaks down. After the Manchester Arena bombing, survivors reported haunting sensory distortions, seeing people's mouths move before hearing their voices, feeling touch sensations seconds after physical contact, experiencing visual stuttering like reality was dropping frames, smelling burning when nothing was burning, olfactory hallucinations from damaged olfactory bulbs. One survivor, a teenage girl, said she couldn't listen to music anymore because the rhythm felt wrong. Her damaged auditory processing made timing perception unreliable. Songs she loved before the bombing felt disjointed, chaotic. Imagine trying to watch a movie where the video and audio are out of sync by just half a second. You'd probably turn it off immediately. It's unbearably frustrating. Now imagine you can't turn it off. That's your entire sensory experience, 24/7, for months or years. But perhaps the most insidious effect is what neurologists call emotional dysregulation. The blast-damaged amygdala doesn't just become hyperactive to threats, it becomes unreliable in its response. Sometimes it fires at completely benign stimuli, a car backfire, a balloon pop, even a door slamming. Other times, it doesn't fire at all, leaving survivors feeling emotionally numb to situations that should provoke normal emotional responses. A father who survived the Oslo bombing in 2011 described holding his newborn daughter and feeling nothing. "I knew intellectually I should feel love, joy, wonder. I knew those were the correct emotions, but I just felt static, like trying to tune into a radio station that wasn't broadcasting anymore." Here's the paradox. The same person can experience both extreme hypervigilance and emotional numbness. Their amygdala is hypersensitive to potential threats, but hypoactive to normal emotional stimuli. This is why bombing survivors often describe feeling like they're living behind glass. They can see life happening, they know they're participating, but the emotional texture of experience, the richness of feeling, is muted or absent. Meanwhile, any unexpected sensory input triggers a cascade of fear responses: racing heart, sweating, tunnel vision, the overwhelming urge to flee or freeze. Your emotional system is like a volume control knob that's been damaged. It's stuck at 0 for most things, connection, joy, contentment, but for threat responses, it's jammed at maximum. There's no middle ground, no nuance, just silence or screaming. Now let's address the memory paradox. Because survivors of mass bombings often report something that seems contradictory, they can't remember the event clearly, but they can't stop remembering it. During extreme stress, your brain releases massive amounts of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. These hormones are supposed to enhance memory formation. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. If you survive a life-threatening event, you want to remember every detail so you can avoid it in the future. But there's a threshold. Beyond a certain level of stress and neurological disruption, memory formation doesn't just enhance, it fractures. The hippocampus, your memory consolidation center, is particularly vulnerable to blast injury. It sits in the temporal lobe, near thin skull bone and major blood vessels. Pressure waves hit it hard. And cortisol, at extreme levels, is actually toxic to hippocampal neurons. The result? Memories form, but incompletely. Fragments encode without context. Sensory details, a smell, a sound, a visual flash, become isolated memory traces disconnected from narrative understanding. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, trauma researcher, describes these as flashbulb memories, vivid sensory snapshots without temporal or contextual anchors. A survivor of the Bali nightclub bombing reported, "I can't tell you what happened in sequence. I couldn't testify in court about the order of events, but I can describe the exact shade of orange of the flames, the specific pattern of cracks in the pavement. The sound of glass hitting concrete, I can hear it perfectly right now, 20 years later. But I can't tell you if it happened before or after the screaming." Your brain encoded sensory information in the amygdala and sensory cortices, structures designed for rapid emotional memory. But the hippocampus, which provides temporal order and context, was too damaged or too flooded with cortisol to do its job properly. This fragmentation is why PTSD flashbacks feel so real and so terrifying. Normal autobiographical memories are recalled through the hippocampus. You remember the time you went to the beach as a coherent narrative. I was 10 years old. It was summer. We drove for 3 hours. I built a sandcastle. But traumatic memory fragments are stored differently. They're encoded as if the threat is still present. When something triggers them, a smell, a sound, a visual similarity, the amygdala reactivates the memory. And because there's no hippocampal context, no temporal anchoring, your brain doesn't experience it as a memory of the past. It experiences it as the past happening right now. After the Bataclan theater shooting in Paris, survivors reported triggers that seemed random to others but made perfect neurological sense. The smell of beer, the venue floor, reverb effects in music, acoustic properties of the theater, red exit signs, visual memory fragments, crowds pressing close, proprioceptive memory of evacuation. One survivor couldn't enter conference rooms, not because of conscious fear, but because the overhead fluorescent lights had the same flicker frequency as the Bataclan stage lights. His visual cortex detected the pattern, activated the amygdala, and his body responded with a full fear cascade, without conscious awareness of why. Imagine your memories as movies filed in a library. Normal memories are on neatly labeled DVDs. Family Vacation 2015, first day of school. You can choose to play them. You can pause them. You can remember their recordings of the past. But traumatic memory fragments are like strips of film scattered on the floor, unlabeled, some of them stuck in a projector that turns on randomly. When they play, there's no label saying this is a memory. Your brain experiences it as current sensory input. Reality and memory become indistinguishable. Earlier, we mentioned the difference between military and civilian blast exposure. Let's dig deeper into why this distinction matters neurologically and socially. Military personnel entering combat zones experience what psychologists call anticipatory stress. Their nervous systems are primed for threat. Cortisol levels are elevated before exposure. In some ways, this provides a buffer. The brain is already in a heightened alert state. Civilians in peacetime settings experience the opposite, violation of safety schema. Your brain operates on the fundamental assumption that concert venues, airports, markets, and marathons are safe spaces. When that assumption is shattered by a bombing, the neurological impact includes not just the physical trauma, but a complete rewriting of your threat detection calibration. Studies by Dr. Aryeh Shalev in Israel compared combat veterans and civilian terror survivors. Both showed PTSD symptoms. Both had damaged neural pathways. But civilians showed more profound disruption in their baseline threat assessment. Veterans could return to a sense of safety in controlled environments. Civilians lost trust in the concept of safe spaces entirely. But here's where the suffering deepens: social recognition. Military blast survivors receive Purple Hearts, medical discharge papers, veterans benefits. Their injury has a vocabulary: TBI, traumatic brain injury, blast exposure, combat-related PTSD. Society has frameworks to understand and honor their trauma. Civilian bombing survivors? Many report feeling invisible. Their injuries aren't obvious. No missing limbs, no dramatic scars, just cognitive problems, emotional dysregulation, and sensory issues that others can't see and often don't believe. A survivor of the Brussels airport bombing said, "People treated me like I was weak, like I should just get over it. They didn't understand that my brain had been physically damaged, that my neurons were severed, that this wasn't a choice." The neuroscience is identical, the damage mechanisms are the same, but the social support systems, the medical recognition, and the psychological validation are drastically different. Finally, let's talk about recovery, or the lack thereof. Some blast survivors show remarkable neuroplasticity. Their brains form new connections, reroute around damaged pathways, gradually restore function. This is more common in younger survivors with single exposure events, but others, particularly those with repeated exposures or severe initial damage, show progressive decline. The protein tangles and inflammatory markers don't resolve, they accumulate. Dr. Lee Goldstein at Boston University studied the brains of military veterans years after blast exposure. Even decades later, he found ongoing degeneration in the frontal and temporal lobes. The initial injury had triggered a chronic neurodegenerative process that continued silently for years. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect. You can survive the bombing, recover your physical wounds, return to something resembling normal life, and then, years later, start experiencing cognitive decline that doctors initially misdiagnose as early-onset dementia or psychiatric illness. A 43-year-old survivor of the 1998 Omagh bombing in Northern Ireland was diagnosed with early Alzheimer's in 2015. It took specialized imaging at a research hospital to reveal the truth: axonal injury patterns consistent with blast exposure decades prior. His brain had been slowly degenerating from that single event for 17 years before symptoms became obvious. The blast doesn't just create an injury, it creates a trajectory, like cracks in a windshield that slowly spider outward over months and years. The impact point might be tiny, but the fractures spread, and eventually the entire structure becomes compromised. So what happens to the nervous system after surviving a mass bombing? The physics are brutal, pressure waves that move faster than thought itself. The neurobiology is cascading. Mechanical injury triggers chemical storms that can continue destroying tissue for days. The psychology is fractured: sensory disconnection, emotional dysregulation, memory without context. And the trajectory is uncertain. Some heal, some compensate, some progressively decline. But here's what every survivor demonstrates: resilience. Not the Hollywood version, triumphant music and montages. Real resilience. Getting up every day even when your brain's threat detection system is screaming danger. Relearning how to feel when your emotional circuits are damaged. Fighting to maintain identity when your memory feels like scattered photographs. Their nervous systems were damaged, but their selves, that emergent property of billions of neurons working together, persist, adapt, endure. If you want to understand how we can better help blast survivors, support traumatic brain injury research, or learn to recognize hidden neurological injuries, I've linked resources in the description. The damage is invisible, but now you've seen it. Thanks for watching.